Okay, so picture this. It's December 2025, and Kash Patel, Trump's handpicked FBI director, just got hit with a massive federal lawsuit that could seriously shake up his entire tenure at the Bureau. We're talking about 12 former FBI agents who just filed a lawsuit in Washington, D.C., accusing Patel, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and the Justice Department of illegally firing them for something that happened 5 years ago during the George Floyd protests. And get this, these aren't just random employees. These are 12 seasoned FBI veterans with a combined 200-plus years of experience, most of them women, many of them working critical counterintelligence and national security cases. They all got fired in September 2025, just months after Patel took over as director. Now they're fighting back with serious allegations. We're talking partisan retribution, political purges, and what their attorney is calling a systematic subversion of FBI internal processes that's making America less safe. This isn't your typical wrongful termination case. This is a direct challenge to how the FBI is being run under new leadership. The lawsuit demands reinstatement, back pay, and damages, and it's landing right as the 2026 midterms are heating up. This is wild, and it's about to get even crazier when we dig into what actually happened. So let me rewind to June 4th, 2020, because that's where this entire situation started. You remember the George Floyd protests, right? The entire country was dealing with massive demonstrations after his death. Washington, D.C. saw some intense confrontations between protesters and law enforcement. On that specific day, these 12 FBI agents who were working various assignments in D.C. found themselves facing down an enormous crowd right outside their field office. And here's the critical detail. The crowd included families with children. And these FBI agents, they didn't have riot gear. They weren't trained riot cops. They were regular FBI personnel standing there watching this massive crowd get more and more agitated. According to the lawsuit, the agents made a split-second tactical decision to kneel in front of the crowd as a de-escalation technique, not as a political statement, not as some gesture of solidarity, but as a way to calm things down and prevent the situation from exploding into violence. The agents say it worked. The crowd didn't rush the building. Nobody got hurt. Crisis diffused, mission accomplished, right? Well, apparently not. Because in September 2025, all 12 of these agents received termination letters citing vague language about unprofessional conduct. The letters didn't spell out exactly what they did wrong. They didn't reference any formal investigation, just "you're fired, pack your stuff." And according to the lawsuit, the real reason was that leadership viewed that kneeling gesture as improper conduct, and they wanted these people gone. And here's where it gets really concerning. One of the 12 plaintiffs was literally overseeing counterintelligence operations. We're talking about some of the most sensitive work the FBI does, protecting America from foreign spies, stopping espionage, monitoring threats from hostile governments like Russia and China. This person got fired for kneeling 5 years ago at a protest, and now that expertise, that institutional knowledge, just gone. The lawsuit quotes attorney Mary Dorman saying that these firings subverted internal processes and are making America less safe. When you start firing experienced agents based on incidents from 5 years ago instead of actual job performance, you lose the people who know what they're doing. You lose institutional knowledge that takes decades to build. And it's not just these 12 agents either. This lawsuit is part of a bigger pattern happening across the FBI. Former FBI Deputy Director Paul Abbott already filed his own lawsuit after getting pushed out. Agents who worked on certain high-profile investigations are reportedly being targeted. Career personnel who've been at the FBI for decades are suddenly finding themselves vulnerable if they're perceived as problematic. Now, here's where perspectives diverge completely. Supporters of the current approach will tell you this is necessary reform. They'll say the FBI needed accountability, that there were legitimate concerns about how the Bureau operated, and that leadership changes were overdue. They'll argue that kneeling during a protest showed poor judgment, and that personnel decisions are within the director's authority. Critics, on the other hand, see this as political retaliation. They'll point to the timing, the lack of formal process, and the targeting of people based on actions from years ago that were already reviewed and cleared. But here's the thing. Even setting aside the politics, there are rules about how you're supposed to fire federal employees. There are processes, protections, internal review systems designed to prevent arbitrary terminations. And according to this lawsuit, those processes weren't followed properly. You can't just decide to fire people for something that happened 5 years ago that was already investigated and cleared by previous FBI leadership. That's not how federal employment is supposed to work. So let's look at the legal side of this lawsuit because the implications are significant. The suit was filed on December 8, 2025, in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. The plaintiffs are represented by attorney Mary Dorman, who's been vocal about what she calls systematic problems with how these terminations were handled. The defendants are Kash Patel as FBI Director, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and the Department of Justice. The legal claims include wrongful termination, violation of due process rights, and arguments that these firings were politically motivated retaliation for protected First Amendment activity. That last part is crucial because the lawsuit isn't just saying the firings were unfair, it's saying they violated constitutional rights. If proven, that could create serious legal liability. Let's talk about the timeline. When these agents kneeled during the protest in 2020, the FBI was under Director Christopher Wray. Under his leadership, the FBI conducted an internal review of the incident. That's standard procedure for any controversial action. According to the lawsuit, that internal review concluded the agents acted appropriately given the situation they faced. No disciplinary action was recommended, no formal reprimands. The matter was closed. The agents went back to work and thought it was behind them. Fast forward to early 2025. New leadership takes over at the FBI. Kash Patel becomes director and starts making moves to reshape the bureau. He brings in new people for key positions, makes changes to personnel, and makes it clear there's a new direction. By all accounts, Patel has been focused on what he sees as necessary reforms at the FBI. His book, Government Gangsters, outlined his philosophy about federal bureaucracy and the need for accountability. He doesn't hide his belief that changes were needed. So in September 2025, 8 months into Patel's tenure, these 12 agents received termination letters. The letters cited unprofessional conduct without detailed justification or reference to the previous internal investigation that cleared them in 2020. According to the lawsuit, this is where proper procedures weren't followed. Federal employees with civil service protections are entitled to due process before termination. You're supposed to get formal notice of specific allegations. You're supposed to have an opportunity to respond. There's supposed to be documentation and review. The lawsuit alleges that didn't happen here. The decision was made and executed without proper process. The lawsuit specifically points out that one plaintiff was handling critical counterintelligence work. Counterintelligence is core FBI mission work. It requires specialized expertise and institutional knowledge built over years. By highlighting this, the lawsuit makes two arguments. First, that firing someone doing critical work over a 5-year-old incident that was already cleared shows the decision was based on other factors. Second, that these terminations are creating national security concerns by removing experienced personnel. When you lose experienced agents, you lose institutional knowledge. You potentially compromise ongoing operations. You send messages throughout the organization that affect morale and retention. This lawsuit isn't isolated. Paul Abate filed suit after his departure. Other agents connected to various investigations are facing similar situations. Multiple lawsuits are expected. What emerges is a pattern that's concerning to many observers. People who worked on certain cases or took certain actions are being systematically removed, and they're fighting back in court. The political context matters here. These legal battles generate headlines. They provide platforms for different narratives. They create documentation that could be used in oversight or future accountability efforts. Let's talk about what happens depending on how this plays out. If Patel and DOJ win these cases, it establishes that leadership had authority to make these personnel decisions. It validates the approach of removing people based on past conduct, even if previously cleared. More changes would likely follow, and the reshaping of the FBI would continue. If the agents win, it would be a significant rebuke. They'd likely be reinstated with back pay. It would show that proper procedures must be followed regardless of leadership priorities. Other agents would be encouraged to file similar suits. Congressional oversight would intensify, and it would complicate the broader effort to reform the Bureau. The national security angle is probably the most important part that isn't getting enough attention. When you fire 12 experienced agents with 200 plus years of combined service, including people working counterintelligence, you create immediate operational problems. Those agents were managing sources, running investigations, tracking threats. You have to reassign their cases to others who may not have the same expertise. You lose institutional knowledge, and you send messages throughout the organization that affect how people approach their work. Foreign intelligence services notice when American law enforcement is dealing with internal disruption. They look for opportunities to exploit any chaos or distraction. So when attorney Mary Dorman says these firings are making America less safe, she's pointing to real operational concerns. The 2026 midterms are also a factor here. This lawsuit provides material for campaign messaging. Democrats will likely use it to argue about overreach and abuse of power. Republicans will counter with narratives about necessary reform and accountability. The story stays in the news as litigation proceeds, giving both sides opportunities to make their cases to voters. So where does this leave us? 12 fired FBI agents are suing leadership, claiming illegal termination for political reasons. The lawsuit exposes questions about how personnel decisions are being made. National security concerns are being raised about losing experienced personnel. Trust in institutions is being tested. The 2026 midterms will partly be shaped by stories like this, and courts will decide whether proper procedures were followed. This is a significant story with major implications that will play out over months of litigation, and regardless of how it ends, the questions it raises about process, accountability, and institutional integrity aren't going away. You can't just make these issues disappear. This is wild, folks. The fact that we're dealing with lawsuits over firings related to a 5-year-old protest incident tells you how complicated things have gotten, and it's only going to get more intense as this moves through the courts.